think a contrast, if members are looking for a handy point of reference, is with the dispensing opticians and the optometrists' bills that we dealt with just recently. If you go and look at those bills and you look at the sections that set up the governing boards of those bodies, they are specifically given the obligation to remember the public interest and to write their rules and to act on behalf of the public interest as part of their mandate. They are not given a mandate to act exclusively for the benefit of their own members. But this is missing. This obligation to act on the public interest is missing from this bill. I regard that as a fundamental flaw, and I regard that as an indicator that this bill can only have been drafted in its initial form by lawyers acting on behalf of the group of people who wanted to self-incorporate. Now, there's a second part of that that's problematic. If one looks at the structure of the board of something like the Barrister Society or the Architects Association or the APENS, I mean, any of those organizations, they have members of the public that can go onto that board. And here's how they get onto that board. They're appointed by the Governor and Council. That is not the case on the board here. The board here is set up so that there are two members at large, that is, non-planners, who are to go on. But you know how they get on to that board? They're chosen by the rest of the board. When people are appointed by the Governor and Council to represent the public interest on the Board of Governors of Dalhousie University or on any entity like a self-governing profession, there's a process of advertising that's gone through. I mean, a number of us, of course, sit on the, I think is it the Human Resources Committee, in which the process of advertising is managed. We look at the ads, we make sure that the different agencies, boards, and commissions are advertised widely throughout the province to all comers. It's an open process, or meant to be. We have lots of problems with it. We think that what happens after the advertising is probably not so open, but it's certainly an attempt at being open, and it's open to anyone in the province. It's not closed. It's not a question of the members of the board, of the self-governing profession, choosing their favorites who will come and be members at large to serve on the board. That's just not the way it is. And when those names come forward as a result of advertising for other agencies, boards, and commissions, their names are scrutinized by the Cabinet Office. They're thought about there. They're sifted. They're reviewed. They come with certain questions that are routine questions answered on paper for the Human Resources Committee member to think about. And indeed, that Human Resources Committee is made up of representatives of all parties. We're able to bring our perspectives from different political angles to bear when questions arise. That's quite a different process than saying, let's appoint two people at large chosen by the other members of the board with no public scrutiny, no public advertising, no review by the Cabinet Office. So these are two points that I picked up simply by casually looking at this bill. So I have to say that it's fundamentally misconceived. It's wrong. It really shouldn't have come forward. I hope members will join with me in urging the planning profession, which is a wonderful, much admired, and useful profession, to think again about the kind of legislation that they want. Along with that, I would ask the government members to scrutinize this particular private member's bill and consider whether indeed it ought not to have come by a different route. Now, I don't know that there's any urgency in this bill. I don't think there is. I haven't heard that there's any urgency in it. I haven't understood that planners have to be set up as a self-regulating profession before all other self-regulating bodies or all other bodies that might be interested in becoming self-regulating. I haven't heard that there's any urgency. So far as I know, and I think I know planning quite well in the province of Nova Scotia, there's no crisis in the profession that requires this to happen. As I said earlier, there are only 2 other provinces in Canada that have legislation that set up planning as a self-regulating profession. That's Saskatchewan and Quebec. Both of those provinces have had those bills and those acts on their books for quite some number of years. There's no problem with planners working in Ontario without this kind of legislation. They work in BC without this kind of legislation. They work in New Brunswick without this kind of legislation. And they certainly work in Nova Scotia without this kind of legislation. I'm not opposed to having some kind of legislation. I want to say that again. I think that's just fine. But what I want is that the appropriate department turn its mind to this and that the appropriate conditions be placed in this bill. If we're going to be asked, as we are, to set up a penalty, to set up the penalty for non-compliance, then I think that has to happen just as a minimum. I want to finish with just one small note, and this has to do with the provision in the bill that has to do with secrecy. I won't quote the clause in particular or give you the number or speak to the details of the words, but I have to tell you that I have had occasion recently to look at similar clauses in other pieces of legislation, and I can't find myself particularly happy with these kinds of clauses. In essence, what they say is that people who are engaged in this process of dealing with the affairs of the association have to maintain secrecy about everything they might happen to learn in the course of their jobs. Well, you know, what on earth is this doing here? I mean, we're not, especially in this bill, I mean, we're not dealing with national security matters. I mean, we're not dealing with the military here. This isn't CSIS. I mean, this isn't child welfare. This isn't a question of client-doctor relations or patient-doctor relations. It's not a question of client-social worker relations and something particular that has to be done for the benefit of protecting the welfare of children or vulnerable persons. What is this? What is this clause doing in this bill? I've seen similar clauses in other legislation, but there's sometimes been a particularly good reason for them. There's no justification for this bill here. It's obviously been picked up somewhere by the drafter and it's drifted in. And I can't think of a better explanation for it than that. If there is some rationale for this, if we're being asked to give our blessing to this kind of provision in the legislation, then I think we need some kind of explanation for it. And we need better limits. I mean, does this apply when there's a public inquiry? If for in some unimaginable circumstances there were a public inquiry into the operations, would this prohibit people from speaking? Would this prohibit people from speaking in court? Would it prohibit people from coming and appearing and talking at a legislature committee? This is not even a well-drafted clause. I don't want to drift too much into clause by clause, but this is problematic. So I want to go back to my main points. I think I've identified a number of specific difficulties with this bill that in and of themselves would require me to ask a cabinet minister if the cabinet minister were bringing forward this bill to reconsider and consider amendments. But apart from that, this bill hasn't even been introduced by a cabinet minister. It's a private member's bill, which, as I've said before, is just the wrong thing when it comes to setting up self-regulating professions. So I hope I've made myself clear. We've had occasion to discuss this in our caucus. We don't really feel we can support it. My starting point was to observe that this bill comes forward as a private member's bill but really, it's not the kind of bill that should ever have come forward as a private member's bill. So I'm hoping that members will either join with us in defeating this bill, or the sponsor will withdraw it, or the sponsor will take it away for further consideration, or a cabinet minister will come forward and say that he'll refer the whole topic to his department for further consideration. That said, I hope others will join in this debate, and thank you for the opportunity to express my views.
Thank you very much. If I recognize the honourable member from Pictou East, it will be to close debate. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you. I just want to thank the honourable member for his comments, and I'm sure during the course of the next few days we'll be able to put some of his concerns to rest, and I move Bill 270 for second reading.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 270. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 270, entitled An Act Respecting Professional Planners.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. To Law Amendments. Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I'd like to recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, would you please call Bill number 274, the Certified Management Accountants of Nova Scotia Act.
Thank you.
All right. I'd like to recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say this bill has been asked by the Society to bring forward. This is a change. They were first incorporated in 1950, and this is accumulation of the changes they want to make to streamline. It has to do with membership. It has to do with code of ethics. It has to do with training. So having said that, Madam Chair, I move second reading.
Thank you very much. The motion is for second reading of Bill number 274. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye? Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is, did you read it?
Is carried.
The motion is carried.
Bill 274, entitled An Act Respecting the Society of Management Accountants of Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee of Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for third reading?
The motion is for public bills for third reading.
Yeah. Yes, Madam Speaker, would you please call Bill number 241, the Commercial Mediation Act?
Question. Yeah, somebody has to move it. 241. I'd like to recognize the Government House Leader, please.
Please to move Bill 241 for third reading.
Question.
You've all heard the question. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 241, entitled An Act Respecting Commercial Mediation.
Order that this bill be passed. And just one moment, please. Ordered that the title be as read by the clerk. Ordered that the bill be engrossed. I agree. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Chair, would you please call Bill 244, Enforcement of Canadian Judgments and Decrees Act. And on behalf of the Minister of Justice, I move third reading of Bill number 244.
The motion is for third reading of Bill number 244. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 244, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 30 of the Acts of 2001, the Enforcement of Canadian Judgments and Decrees Act.
Ordered that the bill to pass. Ordered that the title be as read by the clerk. Ordered that the bill be engrossed. I recognize again the Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, would you please call, Madam Speaker, would you please call Bill number 246, the International Trusts Act?
Question.
No,
Okay,
wait.
the motion is for, no.
Yeah, go
The
ahead.
motion is for third reading
Motion is
of Bill number 246.
Madam Speaker, I move Bill 246 for third reading on behalf of the Minister of Justice.
Thank you. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 246, entitled an act to implement the Hague Convention on the law applicable to trusts and on their recognition.
Ordered that the bill to pass. Ordered that the title be as read by the clerk. Ordered that the bill be engrossed. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, we're in the swing of things now, Madam Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 249, the Enforcement of Court Orders Act?
Yes, I'd like to call Bill 249.
On behalf of the Minister of Justice, I would move third reading of Bill number 249.
The motion is for third reading of Bill 249. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 249, entitled an act to assist in the enforcement of court orders.
Ordered that the bill to pass. Ordered that the title be as read by the clerk. Ordered that the bill be engrossed. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, please call Bill number 260, the Interpretation Act.
I call Bill number 260, the Interpretation Act.
On behalf of the Minister of Justice, I move third reading of Bill number 260.
The motion is for third reading of Bill number 260. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 260, entitled an act to protect public safety.
Ordered that the bill to pass. Ordered that the title be as read by the clerk. Ordered that the bill be engrossed. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, I wonder if we could have a recess for 2 minutes.
Yes, we'll have a recess. 2-minute recess.
So we get like snacks and stuff?
I'd like to recognize the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, that completes the government business for today. Tomorrow being Opposition Day, the House Leader for the third party will probably give us our business for tomorrow.
Yes, I'd like to recognize the Honourable Government, I'd like to recognize the member from Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tomorrow, the House will meet from between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Following the daily routine and question period, we'll be calling Bill number 269, and we'll be calling Bill number 227. I move this House to now adjourn until 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Okay, just one moment. I need. Or is it agreed? Moment of interruption. Yeah. We've now reached the moment of interruption. We'll begin late debate. The subject tonight was submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview. I'd like to recognize the Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to I appreciate to have the opportunity in late debate at the end of today's session to talk a bit about the resolution that was drawn. This is a resolution that reflects the fact that now that the Gomery report is out, the first stage of it, it is important that we reflect on the issue of how money is collected by political parties, and where that money goes, and also, Madam Speaker, how it is distributed after the fact. And Madam Speaker, the issue here is one in this province that has been around for 30 years. Because 30 years ago, when the Reagan government was in power in this province, we had a lot of issues with how money was being collected. And yet today, 30 years later, we still see with the Liberal Party, federally, the exact same issue coming up. And it's an issue of, and it all goes back, this is a saying that is only recent. It came from a good old Liberal, but it's one that is still there, and it will probably be there for a long time. I am entitled to my entitlements. And I don't think there's a phrase that better describes the Liberal Party of Canada, Mr. Speaker, and in particular the Liberal Party in this country, because that's what it becomes about. When they are in power, and we saw this federally, and this is where Gomery came today, that the Liberal Party clearly had a system set up, a system that clearly the politicians in charge of that party knew was happening, that they were providing contracts, untendered contracts to firms that support ad agencies supported the Liberal Party, and in return they fattened the contracts. They provided extra money on those contracts, more than they should have. In fact, I think there was one in which the report was not even provided. There was never a report actually even provided. And in return, what we got was some of that money being provided back to the Liberal Party through donations. And, those are the type of processes that we've seen in this province in the past. We saw it in the 70s with the toll gating that went on with the Liquor Corporation, where certain corporations that wanted to sell their liquor had to, or get the proper space in the liquor store, had to pay extra money. That money went to the Liberal Party. What's the difference? Frankly, there was no real difference, because it's about the Liberal Party, when in power, asking those that have to or want to do business with them to provide money to the party on top of the money they're providing for purposes of the public expenditures, Mr. Speaker. That is the problem. That is why we have a trust fund that's still in the name of the Liberal Party in this province. That money came from that toll gating in the 1970s, and yet today we still have that money, and it's still accessible to the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. And, at least I'll give credit to Paul Martin, the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. He has said that if there's I think he announced today, if there are $1.14 million that was taken by the Liberal Party through this process, he is now saying that money will be paid back. Well, let's give the Prime Minister credit for at least recognizing when that money was collected illegally, that it'll be paid back. I'm still waiting, and Nova Scotians are still waiting 30 years after the fact for the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia to say that they are now prepared to pay that money back. We have not seen that. We have never had a full audit of that program, of that trust fund. We've never had.
Speaker, on a point of order,
recognize the member from Cape Breton South.
The NDP has made a statement in this House that is simply not true. The Liberal Party, there was an audit done, the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, and the amount of that money that was deemed to have been received from toll gating was repaid to the people of Nova Scotia at that time, and that member knows that.
I don't believe that is a point of order. I recognize the member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
And how much time do I have, Mr. Speaker?
You have about 6 minutes.
Thank you. Here's the exact point. Here's the exact point, Mr. Speaker, because this is the House Leader for the Liberal Party has stood up here a minute ago and said, look, we did an audit, but here's the problem. We introduced legislation. In fact, we've introduced legislation more than once that has actually said that there needs to be a forensic audit of that trust fund so we can find the source of all the funds in that trust fund. The Liberal Party did an internal audit. That internal audit said, well, trust us. Trust us. I think it was at the time, it was John Savage before he became Premier. Interesting enough, it happened just before the 93 election. I'm sure that's a coincidence. But he said, look, trust us, we did an audit, and we took the money out that came from toll gating. But they can never prove the source of the money that's been in that trust fund. They've never been able to prove to us what the source is. There's never been that external auditing done to show what the source has of that money that's been in that trust fund. And as a result, we have a trust fund that, in our mind, clearly, until the Liberal Party in this province can stand in this House and in this province and say that we know the source of all the funds from that trust fund, then we will say that that's a trust fund that, this is the problem. The member from Cape Breton South is saying we do know that. But I find that unusual because whenever we talk about introducing legislation in this line, it's the Liberal Party that's always concerned about wanting to have that legislation passed. If they have nothing to hide, the legislation should be fine. The trust fund will be fine. If we can prove the source through external auditing, then there shouldn't be a problem with that trust fund being able to be held up to scrutiny and therefore open for them to use from now on. The problem is they know that that kind of external auditing will show that sources cannot be confirmed, Mr. Speaker, and that is the problem. And again, we see federally the exact same thing happening. It may be different players, it may be different issues, it may be a slightly different process with how it works, using ad agencies, using a fund that's sort of off the books or on the side of the books that's used to promote, I guess at that time it was national sovereignty. But, the problem is that it's about entitlement. And there are people in this country, and there are people in the Liberal Party of Canada and Nova Scotia that feel entitled to their entitlements, that somehow this gives them the right to be able to ensure that the Liberal Party is being provided with the funding that they want to run elections. I think Gomery today announced there were clear violations of the Election Act of Canada, that clearly that the federal party, the Liberal Party, had in ways used funds that were not booked properly or put on the books properly through the Election Act, Federal Election Act, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly what happened in this province as well. So we may talk about different players, we may talk about a slightly different process, but it's still the same thing. It's about the fact that when they have an opportunity to access public funds or to access the reins of power, that they are then asking that, that those involved who want to curry favor will provide a certain amount of funding to the party as well. That's what Gomery said. I think that's what the toll gating recognized in an inquiry that was done in the late 70s, early 80s. Clearly, this is a pattern. This isn't once, this is more than once. This isn't just one aspect of the party, it's more than one aspect of the party, provincial and federal. And as a result, we have, I would suggest, serious concerns with how this works. That we need to ensure that if parties are spending money on political campaigns, that we know the sources of that money. And that could be from a corporation, that could be from individuals, that could be from non-government organizations, that can be from trade unions. The difference is we know the source. We know where that money came from. They have to declare it. It's filed. Everyone knows in this House, Mr. Speaker, that when you file documents after an election, you have to say where that money came from. It's as simple as that. To have trust funds in which sources cannot be confirmed means money is being put into a trust fund, put into an election, and the people who are donating that money, we don't know where it comes from. That's where you're getting into accountability issues. That is when you're getting into issues of whether or not, the whole point of having financing rules is so we know who are financing campaigns for political parties, so that we all know who it is, and then we can all, as a people, in this province or in this country, have an opportunity to look at it, to review it, and to see whether that is appropriate, whether people are beholden or whether people are not beholden to the people who provide them with the money. Mr. Speaker, that is the issue. We need to know the source of the funds. And the problem with what Gomery pointed out was there were sources of funds being provided to the Liberal Party of Canada that did not ensure that we knew where that money was coming from. It was off-booked, I guess is the best way to paraphrase what Gomery is saying. It was off-booked, and that money was provided to the party. The same thing happened in the 70s in this province, and as a result, there is still a trust fund lingering over this province that I would suggest until we can prove the source of those funds, the source in which that money comes from, then there isn't accountability for how that money is spent. That's not the way to do politics in this province. That's what Gomery has said federally, and I would hope this is an opportunity for us to address that provincially as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, member. I'll now recognize the honourable member from Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise on this. It's quite interesting that this would come up today from the NDP. First of all, I fail to see the point, Mr. Speaker, of why it's here today, except to keep consistent with the NDP practice of talking about issues 30 years ago, same as the dogma that they still try to employ in Nova Scotia when it's convenient for them, the socialist dogma that member who we hear from quite often about you should be ashamed or whatever the catcalls are from the back row over there. But I want to remind the NDP of one thing. I want to remind, if you're prepared to get up and throw stones, then you better be prepared to take it. And I'm going to tell you, I've never seen a party that says one thing and does the other like the NDP do in Nova Scotia. The NDP in Nova Scotia has consistently taken money from big unions on both sides of the border in Canada and in the United States, and God knows where else, into their coffers in Nova Scotia. They consistently, with trade unions in this province, demand that the business agents for those unions pay money every month to the NDP in Nova Scotia as a condition of employment, Mr. Speaker, as a condition of employment. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you this, that when it comes to morals about money, the NDP haven't got any kind of a hold on that, because let me tell you, when I witnessed in the last election some of the seats in Cape Breton that they were hoping of taking, they had license plates of workers from Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario. They had people staying in hotels working for them during the election, all paid for, Mr. Speaker, all paid for by the NDP and paid for by trade unions. What other party do you know of, Mr. Speaker, that has labor unions leaders go to their caucus meetings and talk about policy of that party and the policy that they're demanding that party follow in the last election, in the coming election, and in elections from way down the road? Now, Mr. Speaker, in other words, the only fundraising that's legal is NDP fundraising. Mr. Speaker, what is the difference from getting fundraising from business or corporations than it is from getting it from big labor? And the NDP get it from big labor. The NDP, I've never seen a party with such double standards. The NDP are the first party to hang somebody out to dry whenever they get a chance. But I can recall that they weren't too anxious to hang anybody when some of their own members got in trouble, when some of their own members in Cape Breton, were convicted of taking funds from senior citizens. Some of their own members out on the West Coast were caught stealing, and they tried to defend them. And now they have the gall. They think they're going to come back and run for public office again. And if you don't follow the dogma of the NDP, you're kicked out of the party. That's what happened with some members. One is there now, Bev Desjardins, or whatever her name is. In other words, if you don't follow blindly the dogma of that party who's still stuck in the 30s, Mr. Speaker, then you're taken right out of the mix and you're cast aside by this party. But I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the NDP House leader misled this House today when he said that the Liberal Party on its trust fund back 30 years ago did not have that fund cleansed. That fund was cleansed long ago, and $1 million put back to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia on an audit that was done. Now, the funds that were left over in that fund, Mr. Speaker, were deemed to be okay. But the Liberal Party itself, Mr. Speaker, did not want to access those funds. And, Mr. Speaker, the public in this province, I know what the NDP's up to here. The public in this province, the business people in this province know that the Liberal Party has money there, so it's been very difficult for us to raise any money. The NDP would hope that continues, because then we won't be able to raise the kind of money we need to run the election. And I said it, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal Party's funds should be used to operate the next election for the Liberal Party, to use those funds to get elected just the same as they would use their funds, or that the NDP would use the funds they get from big labor. I would like to see the NDP table in this House a list of all their international donations, all their outside operatives that are paid cash to go down and work in some of the constituencies in Cape Breton they think they have a shot at. I'm not saying anything out of school here, Mr. Speaker. That happened. That happened in Cape Breton, and it doesn't happen in the Valley too much because they don't have any hope of winning any seats down there. So they send all the operatives into Cape Breton, paid for with American $20 bills. That's what the NDP does. So for them to have the gall to get up here today and talk about a fund that was already cleansed by the Liberal Party 25 and 30 years ago, I think, Mr. Speaker, is just tells me what the NDP is all about when it comes to trying to get a leg up on the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. Well, I can tell you this, Mr. Speaker, in the next elections, Nova Scotians will have a clear choice in the next election. And I'm going to tell you that we stopped the NDP on the 1 yard line a few years ago, and we'll stop them again on the 1 yard line, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member. You've not used all your time, but I guess we'll recognize the member then from Kings North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very sad to have to speak on this resolution. It would be easy, Mr. Speaker, to be somewhat sarcastic about the Liberal Party as revelation after revelation comes forward concerning the lack of ethics in that party, a lack of ethics which has reached the very highest levels. It would be easy to lampoon a party which puts electoral success above ethical integrity. It would be easy to chastise the Liberals federally for treating the public treasury as their private piggy bank. It would be easy, Mr. Speaker, to point out that the words integrity and liberal threaten to become an oxymoron due to the activities of Prime Minister Chrétien, Public Works Minister Alfonso Gagliano. And it would be easy to point out that the provincial Liberals, by virtue of their guilt as their membership in the provincial and federal wings of the party, share some guilt, and by virtue of this trust fund that we're talking about. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party in the past here in the province put a new spin on that old saying, candy's dandy, but liquor's quicker. And it would be easy, Mr. Speaker, I repeat, it would be easy, Mr. Speaker, to be sarcastic about the Liberal Party, particularly the Liberal Party federally. But instead I'm sad. I'm really sad. I'm sad that the Commission of Inquiry concludes that there's clear evidence of political involvement in the administration of the sponsorship program. Sad that the Commission of Inquiry concludes that there were deliberate actions to avoid compliance with federal legislation and policies. Sad that the Commission of Inquiry concludes that the Minister and senior officials in the Prime Minister's office knew of this activity, but refused to acknowledge their complicity and their guilt in this. I'm sad, and Mr. Speaker, I could go on a great deal about why I'm sad and what this has done to the name of Canadians throughout the world, and what this has done to politics and to politicians in general. But, Mr. Speaker, I find I'm sort of constrained by what I can say because of my past vocation as a clergy. And I'm constrained. I don't have the freedom, Mr. Speaker, to really say what's on my heart. I feel a little bit like the Quaker who had a recalcitrant and troublesome mule who wouldn't behave. And so he said to the mule, this was a Quaker, Mr. Speaker, they don't believe in any sort of violence. He said, "Thou knowest that I am a Quaker, and I can't by my religion hit thee, but if thou dost not behave, I'll turn thee over to a Baptist who'll wail thee but good." And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to turn over the rest of my time to the member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Member. We'll recognize the member from Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the first time this issue came across my desk was in the latter part of 1991. The trust funds in Nova Scotia became a very controversial issue, and trying to identify the source. And the member that spoke and indicated that the $1.3 million that was identified to be tainted is quite correct. That they were the only funds that were identified to be tainted. But what's equally so in that audit is they could not identify the source of the other dollars. And that's the very essence of, I believe, the resolution that was put forth by the member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage. Mr. Speaker, at that particular point in time, I had put a resolution before the executive body of the party to a vote for the membership of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. And I was directed to withdraw that particular resolution because there was a deliberate and methodical directive that we should not speak on that particular issue, and that what was said is said and what was done is done. And if anyone was to take issue with that, then obviously that they would be asked to leave caucus, and obviously that was the case. Yes, and I'm very pleased to say that I was departing. Well, Mr. Speaker, back in the early 70s, the member for Cape Breton South, when I was working for the Liberal Party, he was working for the NDP. In the 80s, Mr. Speaker, when I was working for the Liberal Party, he was working for the Tory Party. And then he saw opportunity knock on his door in the early 90s, and he jumped ship again. Well, Mr. Speaker, anyone that would stand and so vivaciously defend that you have $4 million and you don't know where you got it, that should speak to the integrity of those that would stand and do that. Well, Mr.
Order, please. Order, please. The member from Cape Breton West has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, backstreet bullies are the least of anybody's worries in Cape Breton West. And that's just about what you get every time you listen to the member from Cape Breton South. If he can't get his own way, he tries to bully people. But, Mr. Speaker, on this issue, and this is a very important issue, it's an issue that's before the people of Canada at the federal level, when you're talking tens of millions of dollars that have been siphoned from the taxpayers into the political coffers. And I agree, the Prime Minister is correct in saying that that money should be returned if identified. He is a man of integrity, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unlike the shallow defense that's been put forth by the member for Cape Breton South, just because it's an easy access to money. Mr. Speaker, it's much more complicated. The people of Nova Scotia, you wonder why the Liberal Party is in third place. The only difference between the Liberal Party and the minivan at this point is the minivan has more seats. That's just about the way it's turning out. And, Mr. Speaker, he wouldn't even make a good bus driver at that. He'd have to operate an off-the-highway vehicle.
Come on. Order, please. I'll recognize the member from Cape Breton West.
Yes. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the fact that I ran, because I said that I wasn't going to sell out the taxpayers of Cape Breton County and CBRM, unlike the member for Cape Breton South, who voted to put their taxes up 33%. Mr. Speaker, I remember the day when he said Sydney would never have to have a fudge sale to balance its budget. He's right, they went bankrupt. The municipality of the county of Cape Breton had to bail them out.
Point of order, the member from Cape Breton South.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. As is usual with this member from Cape Breton West, he takes a long view of the truth when he's talking about anything. I'll tell you, I don't want to say the word that I'm thinking, but I can tell you this, Mr. Speaker. That member misleading this House when he says that the City of Sydney went bankrupt. The City of Sydney never went bankrupt. The City of Sydney, when I was mayor, had 11 straight budget surpluses in the years that I was mayor, and that member knows that.
This is a difference of opinions between two members, but is not a point of order. The member from Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The public record shows that they were on emergency funding, and it was only the municipality of the county of Cape Breton and the town of North Sydney that had any fluency. They were the only ones that had a balanced budget. They were only ones that had surpluses. The other 6 municipalities were on emergency funding. You were on life support, and now you're on life support again, and you hate to admit reality. Mr. Speaker, I agree with the resolutions that's brought before this House. In December of 1991, I indicated quite clearly, long before that member decided to jump from one party to the other, that I will certainly table it, that the funds in the trust funds should not be used unless we identify the source of it. Mr. Speaker, I'm consistent on this issue. Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, never mind the little catcalls that come from the wilderness of Cape Breton South. It's over. It's over, Mr. Speaker, and he has to face facts. Mr. Speaker, they have a better chance of getting hit with a Soviet missile than they do of ever forming government with that member sitting as government house or Liberal House Leader. Mr. Speaker. No, I don't think so. Mr. Speaker, I believe this is a very timely resolution. I commend the Prime Minister for being honest and straightforward in saying that any money that can't be identified or is identified to be politically drawn from the taxpayers should go back. It's very unfortunate that the Liberals, who are going down and down and down, hate to face reality. The people of Nova Scotia don't want that type of politics anymore. And if that's what he feels comfortable with, good luck to him, because the numbers will demonstrate quite clearly that the rate, it's a law of residual math with that honourable member over there. He sees $4 million in a trust fund. That's a quick grab. Grab it, Mr. Speaker, and let's be darned with the consequences.
Thank you, member. The time allotted for the adjournment debate has expired. I want to thank all members for their participation, and the House will arise tomorrow at 2 p.m.